Hello and welcome to this new live webinar on portfolio management and analysis in SharePad. In this webinar, I'm going to take you through creating portfolios and then managing the transaction side, so you can replicate your real life portfolio and maybe also create some dummy portfolios to help you test out certain strategies. So first, let's talk about actually creating portfolios. Probably you're familiar with this, but I'm going to give it the once over just to make sure that everybody understands the basic concepts. If we click on the portfolio button here at the top and go to select a portfolio, this will open up the list of all the portfolios you have created up until now. The program comes preloaded with an example portfolio, but if it's a new account, this is all you're going to see. If you want to create a new portfolio, just press the new button and you give it a name. And below you can get to choose the type of portfolio. There's normal or group. Normal is just a portfolio, which is what we'll be discussing now. A group portfolio allows you to group multiple portfolios together. So if you have your portfolio and your spouse's portfolio and your sons and daughters' portfolios, you can then group them together in one portfolio to see what the family is doing as a whole. For now, we'll keep the option to normal. And below here is the portfolio currency. So you can add instruments of any currency. You can have dollar denominated shares and pound and euro denominated shares in the same portfolio. The portfolio currency is the currency in which all of your transactions are going to be translated into. So if you have a pound denominated portfolio and you add Apple to it and record some transactions, those transactions will be marked and the profits will be displayed in pound sterling. So click on OK and then OK again, and SharePad is going to open up a blank portfolio. Now, to fill a portfolio, you can do this in two ways. If you know the instrument you wish to add to your portfolio, you can simply search for it. There's an Add to Port button, and you can click on Search for an instrument. We can search for example, CLI, so see that's CLS Holdings. Here it is, it appears, and we can click on OK. You can, in the search box, you can type in the name of the company, the EPIC code, the ISIN code, or the CDOL code. Anyone will do. So I click on OK, and the share gets added to the portfolio. The other way of adding shares is through a list. So I have now opened up a list of shares, a list of FTSE 350 shares. If you are doing your analysis and you find a share that you wish to add to your portfolio, you can simply select it, go to Add to Portfolio, and the program will offer to add the share to the currently active portfolio. And the currently active portfolio is simply the last portfolio that you have opened. So if we click on Add Selected Share to Webinar, the share will be added to the portfolio. You'll also see below there's some extra options. Add all shares to webinar will add all of the shares in the current list to the portfolio, so it'll add the entire FTSE 350. Add selected and all above to webinar and add selected and all below to webinar will add the selected share and everything above or everything below to the portfolio. This is useful if, say, you wish to add all of the shares that have a dividend yield of over 5%. You can sort the list by dividend yield, go and find the bottom one, and this will add all of the shares. If I go to portfolio, add selected and all above, it'll add all of the shares with a dividend yield of 5% or above to the portfolio. If webinar is not the portfolio you wish to add the shares to, you can use these options below. They're exactly the same as the ones above, except that when you select them, a box opens up and it asks you which portfolio you want to add those shares to. You can select any portfolio by going doing what I've just done, where you go to select a portfolio and you can pick the portfolio to open it. The last portfolio that you are viewing will appear as a shortcut, and the recent portfolios that you've opened will appear here in the list, so they're for quick access. There's a section here called Portfolio Management, and if you select it from here, you can do things like copy, rename, and delete portfolios. Now let's go to the actual transactions section. This is the part that we're going to be focusing on today. So here you can replicate your actual real investment portfolio. You can also use this section to create dummy portfolio to test out strategies and see how they perform over time. I am now going to show you how to record transactions within SharePad. So recording a transaction is pretty simple. You click on the share you wish to record a transaction for. So I've just clicked on BHB Group, and I go to the Add Tran button here at the bottom, and I click on Buy. It will ask me how many shares I want to buy, what's the price per share, any charges and stamp duty that you wish to enter, and then the purchase date. The time option isn't really necessary, except if you have multiple transactions on the same day. If you do, then do set the time in order for SharePad to know which one came first, especially if you made purchases and sales of the same of a particular share on the same day. If you edit the time, SharePad will know in which order those transactions occurred. But if you're not recording multiple transactions per day, you can quite happily ignore the time component. Note allows you to add a note if you want to make a little comment about the transaction, and the non-cash transaction part we will discuss in a bit. Click on OK, and the first transaction will appear on the transaction screen. You'll see 3 rows. So you will see there's a buy, which is the transaction itself. Latest, which is just where the current situation is at the moment. We bought 2,500 shares. We currently own 2,500 shares, and the shares in the individual transactions on the transaction screen can be collapsed, because obviously I've only got one share at the moment with one transaction, but this list could become significantly larger over time. You can use this button here to collapse all of the transactions, and it'll only show you just the summary for those holdings. Now I'm going to record a few extra transactions, and then we can see how SharePad calculates profits. So I go to Add Transaction, and I'll record a sell. I'll record a sell for 1,500 shares, and I'll record them at a profit, and I'll record this on 24th of August 2017, and I click on OK. So now the sell has been added to my portfolio. So I have first a buy, then a sell, and now the latest line here at the bottom. The program will display, so the columns that are displayed here on the transaction screen are the number of shares involved in the transaction. So I bought 2,500 and sold 1,500. The price per share of a transaction. The cost. Now, if it's a buy, the cost is the cost of the shares. If it is a sell, it's the cost of the shares that you have sold. So I'll explain that in a second. Then we have value, unrealized profit, and total profit. Because we had a purchase and then a partial sell, the profit of each section has been of each transaction has been split into 2. So the sell of the 1,500 shares has resulted in a profit of £4,100. the profit that I see here against the buy isn't the profit that I'm making on the 2,500 shares. It's a profit that I'm making on the remainder of my shares. So it's a profit that I'm making on the 1,000 shares that I have got left. So on the 1,000 shares that I've got left, I'm making a profit of £6,800. Of course, this can change because I still own those shares. The price could go up or could go down, so will the profit go up or down. And at the bottom here, I have the total. So it's a sum of the profit that I could make if I were to liquidate the remaining 1,000 shares, plus a profit that I have already pocketed. And here I have a return as a percentage. So this is the return that I'm making again on the 1,000 shares that remain. And this is a return that I have made by selling those 1,500 shares. This is a good time to also look at cash. Now, I have not introduced any cash into this portfolio. So while I have holdings of worth £8,000, my cash is negative because I spent £7,000 in purchasing those shares, and I spent £28,000 to buy those shares, but I haven't yet made it all back. So I'm seeing a negative cash balance. If you wish to add some cash to your portfolio, you can click on Add Cash Transaction. Click on Credit. You can enter the amount. Now, this is all pretend, so let's add a whole bunch of money. And we can enter the date of when the cash credit occurred. So I'm going to put that in the past, and I'll click on OK. Now I can see a positive cash balance. So this is at the top here is a total value of all of my shares I still own. This is a total amount of cash that I have in the balance, and this is a total value of the portfolio, so simply the holdings plus the cash. Now let's go on recording transactions for BHP. I'll add a couple of. I'm adding a few transactions. This will allow me to then explain how the profits are calculated when you have multiple buys and sells and partial buys and partial sells. Okay, so now I've recorded all of the trades that I've made in BHP Billiton. First, a buy of 2,500 shares, followed by a sell, followed by a couple more buys, and then a sell of £3,000. Now, the way that SharePad calculates profit is on a first in, first out basis. So when I recorded this sell of £3,000, 3,000 shares sell, the program first sold these shares and then sold these shares and then these shares, etc. Let me show you. I bought 2,500 shares and I sold 1,500, so I was left with 1,000 shares from this purchase. When I sold 3,000, it first sold the 1,000 shares that were remaining from this buy, and then it sold 2,000 shares from the second buy. So currently the 1,500 shares that I have left are made up of the remaining 500 shares from this purchase and the 1,000 shares from this purchase. Once a holding, an individual purchase has been liquidated, the profit will go to zero. And the reason for that is to avoid duplication. Because a profit is because sales will mark a profit when the sale occurred. If I still showed the profit that I made on this purchase, I'll be seeing the profit here and here, but in reality they're from the same share. So this transaction, this purchase, has been completely liquidated because I sold 1,500 here and 3,000 here. So these 2,500 are gone and it's marked as zero. This sale for £1,500, I made 1,500 shares. I sold and I made £4,100 in profit. This purchase of 2,500, as I stated before, we have. I still have 500 shares from this purchase left. So the profit I'm seeing here is the profit that I'm currently making on those 500 remaining shares. These 1,000 shares are untouched, so this profit here is on the full 1,000. And on the sale of these 3,000, I am making £14,000. Now that £14,000 profit is calculated based on the cost of the 1,000 shares here and the 2,000 shares here. And so I'm just going through some of the questions that have been popping up. How do you buy shares without fully funding a portfolio? You get an error if you try doing that. The program will return errors to saying that it can't calculate certain things if the portfolio isn't fully funded. But you can still record the transactions. It won't prevent you from recording the transactions. And in fact, this is something I did want to mention afterwards, but I might as well mention now. If you're going through and if you're starting from scratch and you have a portfolio, your real portfolio that you've been managing for a few years, and you want to put it in SharePad, it will be a bit of a pain to go through and record every single credit and every single debit that you made on that account. So my advice is to first record all your purchases, record all your sales, all the dividends, so you have all the transactions recorded. At the end, you will end up with probably a negative cash balance of a certain amount. Then all you do is record a single cash credit equal to the difference of between the negative cash balance marked in SharePad and your real cash balance. So say for example, SharePad says minus £7,000 and your real life cash balance is £10,000. You record a single credit of £17,000, and as long as you make sure you record that credit before on a date which is before the date of the very first transaction, then everything should work out correctly. Now, if in doubt, now this is a very simple portfolio, but if in doubt, if you go to the cash section, which simply lists all the transactions as a bank account, you can see if there are any problems with the balance because it will mark in red at any point where the cash balance went to zero. I can show you if I edit the cash credit and not put enough funds in, you will see that there's a problem here with the portfolio. It's because I only had £1,000 and I made a purchase of £28,000. So SharePad is marking in red to say there's something wrong. So you can double check here to see if at any point you went into negative balance. If you did at any point in the history of your portfolio go to a negative balance, then SharePad can't properly calculate the returns because it can't do percentages over using negative numbers. So you can use that to double check your figures. If you put enough cash at the right times, then obviously the balance is always going to be positive. Michael Kim, yes, this is not really what we're going to talk about, how to set alerts on the portfolio, but you're not setting alerts on the portfolio, but you can set alerts on individual, on the actual shares, as in it's not on your trades, but that's all on the alarms section. So if you click on alarms, you'll find the type of alarms that you can set up. I didn't include stamp duty. No, it was, I mean, obviously you can include stamp duty. I just entered, these are obviously dummy transactions. If you enter a stamp duty then figure, it will just be added as part of a charges, like broker charges, as part of a cost. So it will be correctly calculated. I didn't go through and enter it just so I could speed through recording these transactions. Right, okay, so there are some further questions, but I'll be getting to those, so I'll be ignoring them for now. Now, what I wanted to show you as well is the certain corner cases, because these are questions that come up often, like how to handle things like splits and consolidations or takeovers. So I'm going to set up a few examples and we'll go through them together. So first, let's deal with a share split. So share splits are stock splits are pretty straightforward to handle. So I'm going to record a purchase of CLI, and I'm going to buy 300 shares for £15.60. I'll add a charge, and on the 12th of December 2016, and I'll click on OK. Now, CLS Holdings had a share split on the 8th of May 2017, and it was a 10-for-1 split. Now, if you're recording this from a past and you can't remember when a stock split occurred, you can use the prices section in SharePad. If you click on prices, this will open up a table showing you all of the prices throughout the whole history of the stock, open, high, low, close, and it'll also put in the adjustment factor. So if we go back in time to May 2017, we can see that on the last day with old prices was the 5th of May 2017. So, and the share had a 10-for-1 stock split. If I click on unadjusted prices, these were the original prices. So the share on the Friday, the share closed at 19.41 and opened the next day at £1.99, and that was after a 10-for-1 stock split. Without having to, if you don't want to scroll back in time, there's this little button here called adjustment periods, which will hide all of the prices and only show the relevant information on the share split. So it'll only show here whenever a stock split occurred. So we can see the last price before the stock split and the first price after the stock split. And we can see, so it's 10-for-1 on on the weekend, basically between the 5th of May 2017 and the 8th of May 2017. Recording that in SharePad is pretty simple. You go to add transaction, you go to share split, and we have the old number, and we just enter the new number of shares. Now, make sure you record it on the first day in which the new number of shares started traded on the market, because if you record it on an incorrect day, so on the last day, for example, if I record it on the 5th of May 2017, this is going to happen. SharePad is going to calculate the value of your holdings using the new number of shares but the old price, so it will show you a giant jump in profits, which is going to then correct itself the next day. But if you record it on the first day in which the new shares got listed on the market, then that spike does not occur. And that is it. In the case of a consolidation, it works exactly the same way, except that instead of selecting share split, you simply select consolidation, and this is going to, of course, drop the number of shares that you own instead of increasing it. Now, the next thing I wanted to explain and go through is a takeover. Now, handling takeovers isn't as difficult as it sounds. You can just use the same this approach I'm going to show you with in most situations. So, a short while ago, Cybg bought Virgin Money. So I'm going to add Virgin Money to the portfolio. Now, if a share is historical, i.e. it's been delisted, when you do a search, SharePad will still find it. It will mark it in red to indicate that it's a historical share. So that's fine. I select it, I click on OK, and now I've added Virgin Money to my portfolio. I'm going to record the transaction. This will be my hypothetical, the original purchase that I made. I made a purchase of 1,600 shares. I bought them for £3.18. I'll still add my £11 charge. And I bought these on the 25th of January 2016. Now, on the 15th of October 2018, Cybg took over Virgin Money, and the owners of Virgin Money shares were given 1.2125 Cybg shares for each of Virgin Money's shares. The best way of recording this is to liquidate your holdings in Virgin Money without recording a profit. And this is important so it doesn't then impact the things like tax calculations. So the way we do this is as such. We record a sell on the day of a takeover. So that's going to be the 15th of October 2018. We record a sell for all of the shares, and at the total cost of the original transaction. So the original transaction cost 4,999.8. We can see that here. That was a cost of how much the original shares cost me. And I'm not going to put any charges, so the total cost here is the total cost of the shares inclusive and as well with all the charges. I'm also going to tick non-cash transaction because I don't want the sell to impact my cash balance in any way. This isn't a real sell. I'm just disposing of the shares, and I don't want the £5,000 to be added to my cash balance. I click on OK, and now I have liquidated Virgin Money, Virgin Money shares without recording a profit. I just record them at a profit of 0. Now this is important so it doesn't then impact the value and the profits of your portfolio. You then add the other share. So in case it's going to be CYBG, I'm adding it. You then need to record a purchase of CYBG at cost. So I'm recording a purchase again on the same day as the takeover, so that's going to be the same day, and I'm also just going to change the time slightly just to make sure that this occurred afterwards in time order. Now, the number of shares at which you record the purchase of the company that takes over, that you should know. You'll know how many shares were given to you by the transaction. You can just check on your brokerage account. In this particular case, that would be 1940. And we'll ignore these three figures, the price per share, charges and stamp duty, and what we'll do is instead just put in the total amount. And the total amount is going to be exactly the same amount that we recorded the sell for Virgin Money for. So 4999.8. And SharePad will automatically calculate what that equates as on a per share basis. Also here, this isn't a real purchase. There was no exchange of money, so we don't want the £5,000 to be withdrawn from our total cash balance, so we tick non-cash transaction. So the transaction occurs on the transaction screen, but no cash gets subtracted then for your total cash balance. So I click on OK, and now I own CYBG PLC. Essentially what I've done here is I have transferred the cost of the Virgin Money shares over to CYBG. It's as if I had always held CYBG shares. I originally spent £4,999.8 on Virgin Money shares, and that is going to be the cost of my CYBG shares. Now, sometimes in this particular takeover, it was just a straight exchange of shares. You got given 1.2125 CYBG shares for every Virgin Money share you owned. Sometimes the takeover includes a part in shares, and there's also a cash component. So you get given 1.5 shares for of the new company plus 15 pence per share as a one-off payment. It didn't occur here, but if it did, all you need to do is record that extra cash as a return on capital on the new company. So you record your buy just as we've done now, but then you go to add transaction and select return of capital. So again, hypothetically, let's say I got 15 pence per share. You can choose how this is taxed. So this is important also from a capital gains tax point of view. And then we have a payment date, which is going to be the same date as before. And we then click on OK. This time, this is a real transaction, so don't tick non-cash transaction. And here, so we would have then the purchase and the return of capital. Now, in fact, I can see here, what if you had a profit on Virgin Money? Well, so that's Paul Browning that's asking. Any profit or loss would be transferred to CYBG PLC, and any difference in profit or loss will be equals to the difference in value of Virgin Money and CYBG shares. If I delete this transaction, I was actually making a profit at the time. Based on the profit calculated on this purchase is based upon the last price for Virgin Money, so on the last day of trading. So I was making £500. So that profit did get transferred over to CYBG Group PLC. However, since the 15th of October, the share price of CYBG has dropped, and so I am currently making a loss. So when you're transferring the cost over from Virgin Money to CYBG, you're also transferring any profit or loss, because obviously if I'll delete that one there. Obviously, if I had spent, for example, £2,000 less for the shares, and I alter this and alter the purchase, so it now says 2,999. Obviously, now my CYBG shares will be recording a profit. So it's so any profit, any loss from the original shares would be transferred to the new company. Okay. The other questions I'm going to ignore for now, because there's stuff that I am going to there are things that I am going to cover anyway. Now, one more thing that I wanted to show you is investment trusts, because I know that especially like real estate investment trusts are quite popular investment instruments among our customers. So I just wanted to show you something about those. So let's add Triple Point Social Housing REIT to a portfolio, and let's record a transaction, a purchase for that. So I'll record a purchase of 4,000 shares, and again add my cost, and I'll put that on the 9th of October 2017, and here we have it. Now the Triple Point Social Housing is a REIT, so they pay dividends and we can see this under financials and dividends. We can see that they have a dividend, and part of that dividend comes in the form of a PID, so a property income distribution. Now this has to be recorded separately. SharePad deals with that automatically. So this is a good time to look at the automatic dividend recording system. I have now recorded all my purchases, and I will actually record a few cells, and then we'll look at the actual dividend side. So if I do 25th of March, there you go, 2019, I sold the shares for 5, and there we go. Let's liquidate some of the holdings, and okay, so now I have set up a portfolio with all my purchases, all my sales, splits and consolidations. What's missing are the dividends. Now, you obviously, if this portfolio you started in 2010, you don't want to sit down and record 9 years worth of dividend payments. All you need to do is make sure that all your purchases and sales are correctly recorded. After you've done that, under Add Tran, there's a button called Add Dividends Automatically, and if you click on it, you can set a date. You want to ask SharePad to go back as far as you want, so just set up a date before the beginning of your portfolio and press the check button. SharePad has now gone through all of your purchases and sales. It knows how many shares you owned at each moment in time. It knows if you held a share when it went ex-dividends, and it knows how much the the dividend paid. So here is a full list of all of the dividends that this portfolio here is entitled to. Now, if you have recorded some dividends manually, SharePad will see that. There's already a dividend recorded in this portfolio on the 28th of April 2017, so this would not appear on this list, because it will find dividends that have already been recorded and ignored them. If for whatever reason, maybe if there was an exchange rate that is meant that the dividend was actually slightly different, you can alter the dividend here. So just you click on it and you can alter the price per share paid. The price per share paid here is the declared amount, but obviously, especially if you are receiving dividends from an American company, then the actual pence amount that SharePad gives you might be slightly different from the amount that you actually received, because SharePad doesn't know what exchange rate you actually got at the time. SharePad will look at the exchange rate on the day of a transaction. So if you do have a dollar share that pays out a 50 cents per share in dividend, SharePad will apply an exchange rate to it, and it will apply the exchange rate on the date of the that the dividend was paid. But obviously, that might sometimes not be the exact exchange rate that you got. So you can just click on the relevant dividend and make the alterations as you require. After you've checked, if there's any dividend that you don't want added to your portfolio for whatever reason, you can just simply uncheck the option and the dividend will not be added. And then hit add, and all the dividends will be added to your portfolios to the portfolio automatically. Now, in fact, if we go back to the so we have, for example, BHP Group, we have all the dividends that were paid out while we owned the share. If we do look at Triple Point Social Housing REIT, we'll see that SharePad has recorded the dividend and the PID part, so as two separate transactions on the same date, but they're recorded then separately and also treated separately when it comes to the tax. Now, if you have in some situations you might decide to not receive dividends in cash, but you might want to reinvest those dividends. Now, there is a transaction set up for that, and that is scrip dividend. So scrip dividend. Now, scrip dividends don't happen automatically because SharePad has no way of knowing how much the shares that you're buying with that dividend payment cost. So SharePad can't automatically record those dividends, but you can record these manually. You select scrip dividend and you enter how many extra shares you got. So I got an extra 5 shares, and they cost me £1.01, and this will only be known on the date that was set by the company as the date in which the scrip dividend gets applied. Ex-dividend and payment date, and then simply click on OK, and it will be recorded as scrip, and the total number of shares, the extra shares that you got in lieu of a dividend, will be added to the total value, to total number of shares in your portfolio. Now, oh yes, I recorded the, so this is, here it is. I just recorded the purchase of the Virgin Money shares before I recorded the very first cash credit. Therefore, my cash balance has at some point, in fact, with the very first transaction, gone into a negative balance until I added the £100,000. And in fact, it should be easy to spot if something like this happens, because you will see some very odd movements in the total value of your share. You shouldn't see big jumps like this. So I can fix that. This is a hypothetical portfolio, so I can do this. All I have to do is simply set the date of the credit to before the very first purchase in my portfolio. So the very first thing that happened in my portfolio is that £100,000 was added to it, and so now the graph looks all right. It will start from £100,000 and of course go up and down as the value of a portfolio changes. Now, in fact, let's have a look at this at the chart here. By default, the program will display a chart showing you the entire value of your portfolio. And by total value, it's the sum total of all your holdings and plus all of the cash at any given time in the history of the portfolio. You don't have to show it this way. You can actually decide to split these values. If you press the design button here at the bottom, you can choose what lines to display on the chart. So if I just uncheck this and add value of cash and value of holdings and click on OK, and I can now see a chart of the cash and holdings separately. Obviously, this is the two charts are going to mirror each other fairly closely, because obviously every time a purchase is made, the value of the holdings goes up by the value of that purchase, and there's a corresponding drop in the value of the cash. And whenever a sell occurs, the value of the holdings drops by the value of the sale, and the cash goes up by the same amount. The line here called cash invested, this shows you how much cash you had invested in the portfolio at any given moment in time. This essentially is the sum of all of the credits minus all of the debits. In this example portfolio, it's just a straight line because I credited £100,000 to the portfolio and never withdrew any money. Now, if I recorded a debit and say I withdrew £20,000 at some point last year, I click on OK, I can see that the amount invested in my portfolio is now £80,000 because I credited £100,000, I withdrew £80,000. So I can see that from March 2018, I only had £80,000 invested in my portfolio. Obviously here, because I actually withdrew money, the total value of the portfolio has indeed dropped by that corresponding amount. If I delete the cash credit, obviously the cash debit, obviously the graph here will continue as it did before. The last one, which is probably the most interesting one, is the comparison. So you can compare the value of your portfolio against any benchmark of your choice. So we can pick, for example, can pick the FTSE 350 index, and when we're picking an index, you can also tick this option to use the total return of the index if that's available. Most of the major indices that we have, so FTSE 100, 350, etc., have a total return version. So if I don't check this, my portfolio will be compared against the value of the FTSE 350 index. If I tick this option, it will be compared against the value of the FTSE 350 total return index. And What you choose as your benchmark is up to you. When you press the choose button, a search box opens up and you can compare it against any benchmark you wish. And in fact, one thing that I often advise is, instead of using the index itself, like FTSE 100 or FTSE 350 index, is instead to use a fund that invests in that index, because the fund is slightly more realistic. Although a FTSE 100 ETF is going to match the FTSE 100 very, very closely, a FTSE 100 ETF has some costs involved, even if they're very small. So if you search for example, FTSE 100, we can go and find, and we can go under ETFs, and we can pick a FTSE 100 ETF accumulation. So this is going to be very, very similar to the FTSE 100. However, it's a bit more of a realistic benchmark to use. Click on OK, and it's changed slightly, but it has. And obviously, if you are using FTSE 100, the costs tend to be very, very low, but with some other benchmarks and the corresponding ETF, the cost can be a little bit higher. So you can see a change then in the compared to line. Now, the main chart here is just giving you a quick chart. You can zoom in just as you can on a normal chart. So I can click, drag, and let go to zoom into the details. The starting point of a benchmark is going to be the same starting point. So it assumes that I have invested £100 in the benchmark, as well as £100,000 in the portfolio. If the program automatically adjusts for any changes in cash, so if I do record my £20,000 in debit, I withdrew £20,000 from my portfolio. Obviously, the value of my portfolio is going to drop by £20,000, but so will the benchmark as well. If not, it would invalidate the comparison against the benchmark if adding money or withdrawing money was held in your favor or against you. If any changes in the cash situation gets applied to your portfolio, obviously, but also to the benchmark as well. So we can see there's a drop, £20,000 in the comparison and £20,000 in the main share. Now, if you want to check what your portfolio performance has been over any given period of time, that's where the value at a date option appears. So say we want to check how the portfolio has been performing over the last year. We can select 1 year ago from a range. There's a few default options here, but you can set any 2 dates that you wish. So from to any 2 dates. If you select 1 year ago, it'll automatically add the to date is today, and the from date is the same date a year ago. And we can see here how the portfolio has been performing and what has changed between those 2 dates, and also what the benchmark has been doing over that same period of time. So BHP Group, I had £61,000 and I don't worth of shares. I don't own them anymore because I liquidated them, so that's blank. This figure here, this number here shows me the percentage of the portfolio. So at the time a year ago, BHP was 67% to 68% of my portfolio. CLS Holdings, it was 7.7% of my portfolio. It's now 6.5, and we can see the change in value. And Same thing for Triple Point Social, and then Virgin Money, of course, has gone back to blank, and then the cash. Here is the total. So this is a total value of my portfolio on the 28th of March 2018, and the total value of my portfolio on the 28th of March 2019 right now. And these are the absolute changes and percentage change in each of the component parts. I can see that the total value of my portfolio has increased by 19,690 pounds. So the value of my portfolio has gone up by 21.6%. By comparison, the benchmark, so my FTSE 100 fund, has gone up in value only by £7,000. So while I made a 21% return on my portfolio, if I put my money in a FTSE 100 tracker, I would have made only 6.7%. And you can pick any two dates, any two dates you wish. With one slight difference. If you pick any two dates in the past, so from yesterday or any day in the past, it will use the close price to value your holdings on that date. So it'll just simply multiply however many shares you held on that day times the close price of that share on that date. If here though we have today's dates. Now there is no close price for today yet because the market is still open. Therefore the holdings and my portfolio are being valued using the current bid price of the share, if available, of course. If you're invested in a fund that then for which there's no intraday data, the program will just simply use the latest available close price. When the market closes, so if you were to look at this screen at 6 o'clock this evening, the value will be calculated based on the most recent close price for, well, today's close price for that share. Now, I have created this portfolio manually, and in some cases it is necessary, but not always. Depending on where you had your portfolio recorded before you started using SharePad, you might be able to export that information as a CSV file, which you can then import into SharePad. Now, different programs have different formats when exporting the data, so you will probably need to do a bit of rejigging with the file. Now, to import a share in import a portfolio and all the transactions into SharePad, you can easily do it by pressing the import function and import portfolio from file. When you do this, you'll have two options. There's two file formats. There's a Stockopedia export format. So if you have a portfolio in Stockopedia, you can simply export it and you can just import the file. There's no need to make any changes to it. SharePad can read that file without any problem. If, on the other hand, you're using something else that we haven't considered or don't know about, you can use the generic format. Now, the generic format looks something like this. This is the portfolio that we have been creating up until now, and this is a format then that SharePad will understand. So all you need to create an import file is have a list of transactions, and in that list of transactions there needs to be certain pieces or key pieces of information. So there needs to be a column called date, which will give you the date, or in which you would enter the date of a transaction. A column called share ID. Now this is the identification code for the share. There are 3 valid forms of identification that SharePad will understand. One is the EPIC code, so BHP, CLI, etc. The other one is CDOL code, which I have not put in the file. And the other one that SharePad will understand is the ISIN code. So you can just enter the ISIN code, and SharePad will match that with any instrument, with a corresponding instrument in the program. Using ISIN codes is particularly useful if you're importing funds from fund transactions, because funds have got many classes and they're very, very similar in name. To avoid any confusion, using the ISIN code is always the best idea, and you can find the ISIN codes normally on contract notes or things like that. The next column is the type of transaction. So I have the credit here recorded. If you want to record debits, the type will be debit. Buy, sell, dividends, split, and PID. So this is the type of transactions. Shares is a number of shares involved in the transaction. So how many shares you bought, how many shares you sold, or how many shares you got a dividend on. Price is the price per share. And this will be in major currency units. Obviously, this is a CSV file, so the file itself doesn't have any currency. So make sure that you put this in the same currency. So if you get 5 pence per share in dividends, make sure it's entered as 0.05 pounds. Then broker is the broker charge, and the stamp is the stamp duty. Total, this is only needed for credits or debits. So if you want to enter a £100,000 credit, you just enter the date, credit, and total. And the same thing with the debit. Everything else does not require the total amount, because SharePad can calculate it itself by simply multiplying the number of shares by the price per share plus any costs involved. Non-cash, this will be blank or have a 1 in it if it is a non-cash. If not, you can leave it blank. And these are for non-cash transactions. So again, these are our the 2 takeover transactions. And the last column is note. Do bear in mind that even if you don't want to import any notes or have no non-cash type transactions, SharePad still expects there to be a column called non-cash and a column called note. So make sure you have those. So this is basically what the file needs to look like in order for SharePad to understand it. And depending where you get the data from, some files that you can export from some brokerages account, for example, will require a minimum amount of rejigging, and some of them will require a lot of rejigging. I know, for example, that the Hargreaves Lansdown export files for Hargreaves Lansdown, they are not very useful. The format of a file is very, very messy, so it does require a lot of work in Excel in order to get a detailed import files. But other systems do have something that's a lot more ordered and looks a lot more like that, so you might just need to make a few changes to the titles of the columns, etc. And then once you have the file, you go to import portfolio from file, generic format, pick the file itself, click on open and click on OK, and then we'll call this webinar 2, give a portfolio a name and click on OK. Now this the whole process might take a few seconds, so don't worry, just leave it, because it has to run through all of the database looking for your for the shares to match. This didn't take long because it's only 5 shares, but if you have 120 shares, don't worry if the whole thing, if the whole screen goes pauses for 30 seconds or so while it's processing it. Now, for shares where the ISIN code was used, then that's it. It's a perfect match, easy. If you're using an epic code as an identifier, now the epic code BHP is unique within the LSE, but it's not unique in the world. In fact, SharePad has said, oh, BHP, is it BHP PLC? If not, I found some other BHPs within my database. So if you click on other, it's now find BHP traded on the New York Stock Exchange. And if there are multiple ones, you can keep on clicking on other, and it will go through all of the matches that it found. It will always prioritize the LSE first, and the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ or the European market second. So if I click on other here, there you go, it found a CLI on the New York Stock Exchange. So you can then click through, because if you did invest in the CLI on the New York Stock Exchange, you need to click on other to make sure that SharePad is picking the correct share. These are all the correct shares. I click on add, portfolio importer complete. And now if I go to portfolio, select a portfolio, I have my webinar 2, and here it is. I think it's slightly different, because I think in the import file I had actually recorded a sell for every single one of the shares. In fact, the current value of my holdings is 0, because I have liquidated all of the shares. In fact, I have 0 shares on all of my holdings. Now, a couple of things before before we move on then to the tax section is, if you have a very large portfolio, especially if one that goes back many years, you will have lots and lots of shares which you have liquidated and you no longer own. Now, it's fine if you only got 5, but if you start getting dozens and dozens, you want to probably get rid of those shares without actually deleting them, and that's what this button here does. Current holdings will hide all the shares that you don't own. So if I click here, in fact, my entire portfolio disappears because my holdings are now 0. If I delete the sell transaction, you'll see, so now I have liquidated these 4 but still own CLS. If I click current holdings, I'll only show CLS. And the same thing goes for the list here on the left hand side. If you go to port, you'll see an option called show current holdings only. If I click on it, it won't delete the shares from the portfolio, but it will hide all of the shares that I don't currently own. Because again, especially with very old portfolios, you'll probably have more shares that you no longer own than you do have shares that you do actually own at this very moment in time. So portfolio, and just toggle the option on and off to hide or show everything then. And yes, this webinar has gone on a little longer than I expected it, so I'm going to quickly go through the actual tax section. Now, the tax here, you might not be interested depending on how you invest, if it's an ISA or a SIP, or if it's a taxable portfolio. But the tax is divided into 2. You have a CGT part, the capital gains tax, and the dividends part. You can pick what tax year you want, so I picked current year, so the one that is yet to complete, and you can show the breakdown of all the calculations done by SharePad, or just a summary. So here I've picked I'm looking at the CGT page. It looks at all the sales that I've made, the shares, what I bought them at, sold them at, gain or loss, and then the total gains. This is a little box which is the HMRC capital gains summary, which is what you need to fill in on this summary of your capital gains tax report. So the number of disposal proceeds. So this is, you can just copy paste from here. And then SharePad will calculate the total profit for the year, so £19,000, add the exemption, and give you the total taxable gain for the year. It says provisional, of course, because the tax year isn't over yet, and then it will give you what how much you need to pay if taxed at 10 or 20%. And dividends are similar. this is for income tax purposes. If you need to pay any extra income tax over the top of the exemption, the £2,000 exemption. So again, total dividends paid. PIDs are marked separately, and again, you get the total. The exemption is subtracted, and this is you owe tax on the £822, and this is how much you'd have to pay in tax based on what tax band you are in. And the same thing here for the PIDs. Now if you wish to print the page, right, so I'm going to go quickly through some of the questions because I saw that many got accumulated. I did ignore some because I was going to talk about it later. But so the export or print, yeah, so if you just want to print, you can just go to the sharing button and print. This a print button exists on any screen, so if you want to print a chart, you go to sharing and there's a print button there, or if you wish to print the financials, you could go sharing and print. So you can do the same thing on the transaction screen. Sharing, print, and it'll print the screen as you see it, so you can show the calculations or not. Is asking about, can you show the portfolio performance in periods greater than 1 year, both in total and annualized form. So yes, obviously the portfolio performance over periods greater than 1 year, you can do it on the value at a date. You pick any 2 dates you want and it'll show you the performance. It does not calculate it on an annualized basis. The only part of where it does calculate the return on an annualized basis is under the holdings section. If under holdings you go to design, go to columns and add annualized return, it will give you the annualized return over that over the chosen period. Over the entire history then of the holdings of that share. And can you calculate a ratio ROCE for a portfolio as a whole? I don't understand. Well, not for your whole, or do you just mean as just for a given list of shares? No. There are P and things like P and yield calculations for various indices, i.e. all the shares of a particular index, and those you'll find under other lists. And under indices you'll see index P's and yield, so you can see the P ratio and dividend yields for say the FTSE 350 for example, or the aerospace and defense sector index, but it's P's and yields, not ROCE. Okay, this I have answered, and I have a share which you do not list, but it's one very important. It is ever listed on CAC. I imagine when you say listed on CAC, is that on the French stock exchange? Well, we can, if we do a search, we do have Airbus Group traded in Paris. This is, I imagine, by the way, I'm answering John Mason here, and it is Airbus listed on the CAC. We don't have the exchange. The European data we have comes from Cybg Europe, so it's the Chicago Board of Exchange European branch, which is an pan-European exchange, and that's where all our European shares are listed. But we do have all the major European shares listed there. This is just Airbus Group is just a secondary listing of Airbus. It's listed on the Paris Stock Exchange and on Cybg Europe, but the price is going to be the same. Okay, and okay, so going back, this I missed from when I was talking about the takeover. Adrian Needham says, can a takeover in different currency be dealt with? Actually, current WorldPay merge takeover of FIS Inc. WorldPay is quoted in pounds while takeover of shares and parts US cash. Well, all the purchases and sales in this case, so the just as we handled the Virgin Money CYBG takeover, it will have to be handled in a portfolio in the portfolio's currency. So yes, you can. If your portfolio is in pounds, then then you would calculate you would sell your WorldPay shares in pounds and to match the purchase cost of WorldPay, so you record a profit of 0. You would then purchase the FIS shares in pounds, record the transaction in pounds for the same amount for however many shares you got in FIS Inc. And SharePad will then calculate the profit because it knows the exchange rate between the pound and the dollar, so it will convert that. But all the transactions and sales would need to be recorded in pounds, or need to be recorded in the portfolio currency. And part US dollar cash, yes, that again you will have to record the part US dollar. So the return on capital in US dollars, that you will have to convert that into pounds. I imagine if you have a UK brokerage account, you should see then how much cash, so the the $5,000 that were given to you in cash, how much that corresponded then in pounds, and then use that to record the transaction. And are you going to add a capability to automatic interest received on retail and corporate bonds? Yes, at the moment our data supplier does not have or does not provide data for the pay dates and of coupons on debt. So yes, that we do not have, so we can't. So the program doesn't automatically record interest, so coupon payments on bonds of any kind, unfortunately. Colin McNeil, if I started to record my transactions by way of a transfer from ShareScope and made a mess of it, can I simply open a new portfolio recorder and proceed as you have described? Yes, obviously. I mean, or you can build as many portfolios as you want. You're not actually buying and selling shares, so you can create as many as you wish. If you are transferring from ShareScope, do bear in mind that there is an automatic transfer. So if in ShareScope you go to File, Export, you'll see an option that says Export Portfolios to SharePad, and then once you've done that in SharePad, you go to the settings and go Import ShareScope Portfolios, and that will import the portfolios that you've exported, and so they'll be converted automatically for you. Yes, if you have free dealing portfolios under a group portfolio, so the way the group so yes, if you have free dealing portfolios under a group portfolio, will the CGT calculation aggregate the cost basis of multiple holdings in the same company across the dealing portfolios? So the way group portfolios work is that they are going to be it will merge the transactions together as if they were a single portfolio. So if you have, if for example you had a purchase in January on one portfolio and the sale of those shares in May, but the second portfolio you had a purchase in December and then a sell in February, it will merge those together. So it will put the it will treat the transactions in the order in which they appeared on each portfolio. So it will treat them as if they were a single portfolio, and the order will be determined by the date in the transaction. And obviously then everything else, so profit calculation and tax, will stem from that. Okay, so if no more questions are coming through, then I will stop the webinar here. I hope I have given you Enough information then so you can proceed building your real portfolio or your fake portfolios, however you wish to use a portfolio management site. As always, if there are any parts that are still remained unclear, you need to ask further questions, you can contact us via email, via phone, at any time. We're here to help. In the meantime, thank you very much for tuning in this afternoon, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.